All right, guys, it tells me we are going live, so it must be about 7 o'clock on Wednesday night. I want to welcome everybody to another weekly episode of Conversations with Cougars. And I bet most of you guys recognize my guest tonight. Of course, it's Coach Emory Latta. Good evening, Coach. It's already been good chatting with you for a few minutes. How you doing?
Yeah, thank you, Bernard. I appreciate it. Good night, or welcome to everybody. Thanks.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we're going to get into Coach Latta's past, and it's a great story as far as I can tell. I've known of Coach Latta for many, many years, but he's currently head of school at Providence Christian School. But there's so much more to tell, and I'm just so pleased that he's got a little bit of time to share with us tonight. It's not easy being head of school, I'm sure, but particularly when you got to deal with everything that you're dealing with in 2020. So thank you, Coach, for making a little time for us this evening.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Well, guys, if you don't know some of Coach Latta's story, he's actually in the last graduating class of 1978 of Dothan High before the split, before Northview became a school in the fall of 78. And Coach, that's where I'd like to start, if it's okay with you. I want to know what was, if you remember, what was the talk, what was the thoughts of your classmates and your teammates? Because I know you played a bunch of sports at Dothan High, won a state championship in baseball, played on some state championship game football programs in 74, 75, I think, or 75, 76. But what were the thoughts of your friends and your teammates about this split, and some of them going to be going to the new high school in the fall? I know you were graduating, but I know you had a lot of friends still in the younger grades.
Oh yeah, I remember very well practicing baseball at Pittman Field where we practiced and played our games. And Northview had started football spring training for the very first Northview team. And I remember, I don't remember if it was the parking lot or passing Steve Ince. So Steve was a sophomore on the Dothan High team. And so in the spring, we're all at Dothan High still going to school, but they're getting ready to go to Northview. And he's been practicing Northview, dressed and practiced at Rickview Stadium that spring. And I passed him in the parking lot, and I just remember him looking at me and saying, Emory, I just got one thing to tell you. And I said, what? And he said, you haven't practiced football until you practice football for Northview. I mean, he's talking about how tough Coach Parrish was on them and how difficult that spring was. So I just remember that well. But yeah, that was surreal. It was really different because all through our senior year at Dothan High, they would have the people that were going to go to Northview were voting on the mascot, the school colors, those kind of things. And so we all remember that pretty well. And there was some, it was difficult for a lot of the kids, especially the ones that were juniors and sophomores, and they got split up. So I know that had some wounds that they struggled even through their high school years and even after with having to split and go, to two different schools.
Well, Coach, were there any? You guys had such a wonderful championship spring, that 78 with Bubba Johnson, the baseball program winning the state. And Coach Johnson, of course, came over to Northview and started up the Northview baseball program. Were there guys on your baseball team, from younger classes, who were playing baseball at Dothan in that spring and also going to spring training with Northview at the same time?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if there were any varsity guys. I know Ted McClendon was on that team, but I don't think Ted was playing football. But Ted played second base on the baseball team as a sophomore, and so then he ended up going to Northview. But I don't really remember a whole lot of the guys that were on the baseball team, the varsity team anyway. There are probably a good many that were on the junior varsity team that had that happen. So we were a pretty heavy senior team too. A lot of seniors and juniors and a few sophomores. There weren't very many.
Well, I couldn't imagine having my head and my heart split between two different schools. The only school I knew of, Dothan High, it's been in the city of Dothan for 70, 80 years, whatever it was. And then here comes this upstart brand new school, and I'm getting dragged next year, and I got to go practice with this new program. And I know Coach Parrish, we've had him on the show, and he talked about how many guys came out that spring. There was a ton who came out in the spring, but it was tough. But Coach, before we keep going, a whole bunch of folks have rolled in. I got to give you some shout outs and let you know who's watching us so far. We got David Mims, Eric Easley, Coach Jerry Andrews, Shirley C says to tell you hello. Tara Wade Estes says to tell you hello. And she said, what about Clint Wade? Do you remember Clint at that time?
Yeah, I do.
Well, Coach, you graduate Dothan High in '78 and you head up to the capstone, and I know you were up there. And what I want to talk about is, as you're graduating high school, you're getting into your college years. Did you always, at least at some point, know that you wanted to go into coaching or stay in sports in some level? Take us through some of that.
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I went to Alabama. My parents had gone to school there. I've grown up as an Alabama fan, and just really with the intent of walking on the football team, and went through some of the workout in the winter workouts, and met the strength coach. And when it came obvious to me that that was not going to work out for me doing football, he asked me if I would help him in the weight room. So I just helped him some. I was pretty interested in already competing in some powerlifting things at the time. And so it was just kind of natural to help them in the weight room. And so that's really probably what got me into coaching, was doing that. And then a guy came the next year, I think it was my junior year, who was a graduate assistant who ironically had been a private Christian school head of school and had decided that he wanted to get into strength coaching. And he got the job at Texas A&M as the head strength coach. And actually Coach Bryant is the one who kind of hooked him up with Marvin Tate, who was the AD, who was one of the guys that was on the team that was, the book was written about.
Junction Boys?
The Junction Boys. So Marvin Tate was one of the Junction Boys. Well, he was the AD at Texas A&M. And Coach Bryant told him about Dave Williams. And so Dave was the gentleman I was talking about. This is the assistant strength coach. And so he asked me to go with him. So I went to Texas A&M and stayed out there. I only stayed one semester, the fall of 1981. But the head coach was had gotten fired. And that's when Jackie Sherrill went to Texas A&M. Mm-hmm. I ended up coming back to the university and graduating and helped some there with the strength program in Tuscaloosa again until I graduated. And then we moved to Dothan. And after having moved to Dothan, I guess I'd been substitute teaching a little bit. It's when Coach Creel stepped down, Coach Golden became the head coach. Coach Golden was my position coach when I played at Dothan High. And he asked me if I would consider coaching, so I did that. And so that was the summer of 1983. That's when I started my coaching career and loved it. I fell in love with it. I mean, I just absolutely.
Well,
after the first day or two of practice, I knew that's what I was going to do.
Well, I'm just a few years younger than you, but you came on my radar because I knew you were on the Dothan High staff while I was in high school. But before we get there, I meant to ask you, when you went up to Alabama, Stedman Shealy from Dothan High, of course, was on the roster. Were there any other Wiregrass or Dothan athletes on the Alabama team at that time?
There were. So there were Joe Godwin from New Brockton, was a freshman. He and Mike Shula, actually Jim Farmer. That was the year Jim Farmer was a freshman on the basketball team. So Jim that played at Houston Academy. So and being in the strength program, I got to work with all different athletes in different sports, and so had a good opportunity to really meet Jim for the first time. I talked to him. That was pretty neat. And of course Joe Godwin from New Brockton, whose two boys graduated from Providence and played at Providence and played at West Point, transferred to South Alabama, and was at Vanderbilt last year in his senior year. But so yeah, I think I'm trying to think of any other athletes from the Wiregrass. Marcus Hill. Marcus was there that played at Dothan High. I don't remember anybody from Northview. Besides where Larry Roberts came, but he came after. Well, maybe he was there that freshman.
Larry was in the fall of '81. No. I'm sorry. He would have graduated in '82, so it'd been the fall of '82.
So he was the same as Mike Shula. He and Mike Shula and Joe Godwin and Jim Farmer, all those guys were there as freshmen that fall of 1982. That was the last recruiting class that Coach Bryant had.
Yep, that's exactly right. Well, going back, you get back to Dothan. Coach Golden hires you. You're at Dothan High for more than a decade. And I know you had different positions, but what I really remember you from is being the strength and conditioning coach. I don't know if that was the title back then. I just know that you were the guy in charge of getting everybody in shape.
Yeah. And, I was I enjoyed doing that. That was good.
Was Coach Golden the coach the whole time, or were there other coaches during
No,
that?
he was there as the head coach. He was there the whole time I was there, but he was the head football coach through the 1986 season.
Hmm.
So in the fall of 87, and actually, I guess it was in the spring of 87, Bobby Devane, who had been an assistant coach and had gone in administration, was the principal in elementary school, was hired as the head football coach. And so he was there the rest of my career until the last year I was at Dothan High. So Coach Devane was there from 87 to the fall through the season of 93.
And then a couple of years later, you land at Northview, and that's where I want to pick up. What was your first? Oh, Coach Randy Hicks says to tell you hello. He just what was your first position? What got you over to Northview? Who was there to recruit you, so to speak? Talk to us about your coming over.
So after the 94 season, and I left Dothan High, I knew that during that school year I was going to leave. And I didn't know what I was going to do. Sometimes you just know it's time. And so that was, I wasn't really sure if I was going to get out of coaching or not. And so I ended up at Providence. I was being a member of First Pres, and my children were going to Providence, and I ended up being hired as the principal for the first year. So 95 and 96, those 2 years, 95, 96 school year, 96, 97, I was at Providence. And then I got back into coaching in kind of a interesting way. But one of the things that happened was that Coach Kennard was a member at First Presbyterian Church, and he sat right in front of me. And so, of course, he had known me when I was coaching at Dothan High, and he would turn around every once in a while, every 4 or 5 times, I guess, during the time, he'd say, "You need to come help me. You need to come help me." So I had talked to him about, even when I was at Providence still, coming and helping. Well, then when I saw I was going to get back into coaching, he said, "You need to talk to me." And so we started talking. And that summer, I think David Ryan left. And so they hired me to come and do the strength program there and also be an assistant coach. So the fall of 97, that was Gabe Gross' senior year. I was hired as a PE teacher, the strength coach, and then I coached the wide receivers on offense that fall for Coach Kennard.
Well, you grew up a Dothan High fan. You played for the Tigers. You graduated from there. You went back and coached and taught for more than a decade. Mm-hmm. What was it like putting on the maroon and gold?
That's a good question. And, people ask me about that a number of times. But, even like when I was coaching at Dothan High, that's where I went to school. But the people change, the things change, and your position changes. And then even at Northview, kids are kids. And I've heard Coach Pierce even talk about that because he had a similar experience. And then, I'm not the only one. Wayne White was in this situation too. And I don't know if y'all talked to Wayne or not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. So, and there was somebody else I was thinking that it also coached, but of course, Coach Devane was an assistant principal at Northview, had coached at Dothan High, and then he came back to Dothan High as the head coach. So there's been, of course, Bubba and a bunch of people that got shifted around. Coach Kirkland, that was the basketball coach, but both Northview and Dothan High. So there's a number of us who've had that happen. So I think once you get started in something, you don't really see it. You see your boys as the team you're coaching.
Right.
They're loyal to you. You're loyal to them, and you go. It's your job. That's what you do. And coaching is coaching, and kids are kids, and it doesn't matter where I've been. And people have often asked me what was my favorite, team or place I've coached. But they were all my favorite. Wherever I was at the time, that was my favorite. And when I went to Northview, and then when I became the head coach, my plan was to stay there forever. And so I've never had a job that it was any different than that. You're just going to give them all you have, and they're loyal to you, and you're loyal to them, and you love it.
I have no doubt about that with you, but I suspect those first couple of days, it must have felt a little like an out-of-body experience. I'm really working over here with these guys. I'm sure you were pumped up and ready to do your thing, and all the kids were probably very enthusiastic, particularly when they got into your system and learned what your program. But I suspect, at least for anybody, just going over to the enemy, the other side across town, must have been a unique experience. But guys, I'm talking with Coach Emory Latta, of course, and we've got some more folks who rolled in. Andy McDuffie, and Charles Bronson and a few others. So thank you guys. We're spending some good time with Coach Latta, and we're in those early years. Of course, Coach Latta eventually became Northview's fourth coach. Third coach was Coach Kennard, and you succeeded him. But we want to stick right now to that first year that you're with Coach Kennard. I'm sure that being on his staff, because he was such a well-known figure, having played and coached in the SEC and just known by so many in the football world. I bet that was a pretty unique experience. I know my brother David played for Coach Kennard one year and really learned a lot that year. But tell us from your perspective about being on his staff, what that was like.
Oh, that was great. And, the other assistant coaches were great. Kelly Poole and all the guys that were a part of that staff, we got to be close, and it learned a lot from those guys. And Coach Kennard was just crusty on the outside, but those kids loved him. He loved them. When you really got to know him, you really appreciated his perspective. And then just the fact that he had so many good stories of that he would share along the way about his experiences, having coached in the NFL, and then also, being the head coach at Ole Miss. And I even asked him one time, when the Ole Miss Mississippi State game was about to be played, I remember standing out on the front there in the gym at Northview, and I said, "So, Coach, who you got in the Egg Bowl? Who you like? Who you pull for?" And he didn't. He was looking straight ahead, and he was chewing on like a toothpick or something, like he used to do. And he took it out, and he looked at me. He goes, "I hope they both lose." He turned back and looked straight ahead. I just busted out laughing. I mean, that's so Coach Kennard.
That's great. That's great.
He was a piece of work.
Well, that first year, that fall of '97, what were your game day, those Friday night games? What do you remember your responsibilities?
Yeah, I coached the wide receivers. And so, during the game, I wasn't calling plays, or we would certainly talk at halftime and then make some adjustments along the way. I remember some things about the practices. I remember one of the practices was the first time ever in my coaching career that when we did a scale pass 7-on-7 kind of a drill. I remember one particular day, Gabe, we had no incompletions and no interceptions. He completed every single pass in a practice. That means everybody caught him, and he was on target with every throw, and they were covering us. So, and we had a good defense. And I just remember even remarking, I think I told Ricky Perry or one of the other coaches, I think that's the first time I've ever seen that. And they said, "What?" And I said, "There wasn't a single incompletion." And they said, "What?" And we talked about it and said, "You're right."
Tell me that wasn't a preview of things to come in Gabe's career coming up and playing at Auburn and then later in the Major League Baseball. Yeah. Andy Duffy has a comment for you, Coach.
Okay.
So grateful for Coach Latta. He got a hold of me at Girard and instilled in me the love for lifting weights. You mean a lot to him, Coach. So it's very kind of you, Andy. Very, very kind words.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Well, Coach, the next year you became the head coach at Northview.
All right.
Coach Kennard is no longer the head of the program. Did you know that you were going to be named, or what was the process about you becoming the head coach?
Well, Coach Kennard did not resign until later in the summer. I mean, I think it was in July, maybe a couple of weeks before the start of football practice. And so that was different. I was excited. That was one of those kind of things that, and I certainly know the Lord's hand has been on me, and almost every circumstance and situation, you can start to see something kind of happen. And that was kind of the way that was. But it happened so fast. I can't remember everything exactly, except just the principal had talked to me, and we chatted about, he asked if I would be interested in that. And I think there were probably a few interviews, and then they offered us the job. And then, we pretty much hit the ground running, trying to put together what we were going to do. And that probably wasn't the best, obviously, of situations. And, what you're going to try to put your stamp on something. Looking back, it probably would have been wise to just to stay with where we were and done what we did. And we tried to make some adjustments and changes. It's a pretty tough year. I think we won 2, maybe 3 games. I cannot remember exactly what the record was.
Y'all were 2-8 that year, but the next year went 6-5.
Yeah. And so
you didn't have very long to prepare for the season. You certainly didn't have much time at all.
Yeah.
But what do you, being the, sometimes when I ask this question, it's very vivid in the memory of my guest. Sometimes it's a blur.
This was a blur.
What I was going to ask you, do you remember that first game or those first games being the head coach, having to talk to the press as the head coach, meeting with the other coach on the other side, or just whatever those responsibilities were? Is that a blur, or is any of that vivid in your memory?
Yeah, it's pretty much a blur. I think probably, you're dealing with the tyranny of the urgent as much as anything else. My ambition was always to be a head football coach, and I always saw myself in the future as doing that. And so then it was there, and but we had a staff that was very experienced and knew what they were doing. There was no question they did, and I don't think there was any doubt from a coaching standpoint. The kids got coached up, and we tried hard. Of course, we played a tough schedule. We played Vestavia. This is when, of course, there's 2 schools. Your 6A school, which is the largest classification. There wasn't a 7A.
Right.
And then our area, we still were doing areas then that year. Of course, you had Enterprise and Dothan had a run of a couple of undefeated seasons in there. I think that year, 97, we were the only game they lost in the last game of the season. Northview beat Dothan.
Yeah, that was a big win for Northview.
That was, and so huge win, and kind of was a disappointing season. Except that kind of capped it off. That was the guys came together and played fantastic in that game. And but then the next year was that year that the first year I was the head coach. And so no, I don't remember the press. I remember there's a whole lot to head coaching that you don't really know. From the outside looking in, you don't realize the responsibility that's there with all the extra duties and the different things. And after having been the head coach at Northview, I think later when I was coaching as an assistant again, I could enjoy that more. And I think it makes you a better head coach to have been there, done that, and then recognize what that is.
The experience alone, that factor, you can't replace it. Well, Coach, when you took over so late, leading into the 98 season, did the staff stay intact, or did you have to make some replacements? Right.
No, we used the same staff that had been there, that had been there the year before. So it was all the same. Like I said, the hardworking guys, had a lot of experience, and Coach Kennard pretty much brought most of that staff. I think all of them he had hired. Mm-hmm. The only one, Floyd Griffin, was tried and true, been there the whole time, all the way through.
Guys, just as a side note, I'm still working on Coach Griffin. He promises me he's going to come on the show. We just got to find a time when he's available, but he promises.
Well, good, because he would be a great one to have on here.
That might be a 2-hour show.
It might be. He can tell some stories.
I'm sure. Well, Coach Latta,
I want to tell one about him, though, while we're talking about him. Can I tell a quick story about him?
As many as you got.
Okay, so Shane Bryan was a receiver. Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm coaching receivers, mm-hmm. and Coach Griffin's coaching the defensive back. So we went head to head with our guys against his guys every day. And so one day Shane ran a pass route or something, and I forget who it was that lit him up, but somebody almost knocked his helmet off and interfered with him. It was obvious pass interference. And so Shane jumps up and goes, he looks right at Coach Griffin. He goes, "What is that?" Just right at Coach Griffin. Coach Griffin says, "Football."
Welcome to 6A football, Shane. That's awesome. Coach Latta, we go into the 99 season and you actually have a playoff team right here. You had some awesome area notable wins, and I want to kind of jog your memory a little bit from some of those games, because we beat up on some of our rivals and you took it to a Mobile school later in the season. So share with us some of those good memories and some of the players who stand out from then.
Well, that was a transition year because after the 98 year, we had a number of staff changes, and the guys were embarrassed by the season that we had gone through. And they were resilient. There was a strong junior class that became seniors. And, there was no question that they had bought into training and working hard. And, that's where Andy and that bunch came in too, is I think Andy was probably a freshman along about that time in the program. But those guys worked as hard and as I've ever seen. And in fact, Coach Griffin and I were the only coaches as we were about to start spring training that were still on the staff. And so I pretty much had those guys to myself in the training in the off season. But I can just remember Josh Maddox and Chase Smith, Dedrick Roberson, Albert Williams. They were, again, I'm calling names, but I mean, there were that particular group, Smith Griggs,
Andre
sold out to getting better and what we were doing. So we changed offenses, went to a system of the double wing running the football to, double team blocking. And the guys got excited about that. And then put it together in the summer and, started off, you could tell, in August and September that we were going to have a good football team. So one of the things that had happened was that they had lost Adam Gay in the summer, June of that year, in a car accident. And he was one of the guys who had bought in and was such a hardworking, great athlete, great baseball player, played basketball some. I don't know how much in the varsity year he played, but just a great athlete, played tight end and played defense too. And it just was a heartbreaking thing that happened. And then later in the summers when the two girls, Tracy Holland and JB Beasley in that class, were also murdered. And so there was a lot of unity that came together in the school and in that senior class especially. And I think this particular group took it out on the football field too, and that helped that team.
Well, I know they had big victories over Enterprise and Dothan that year, and I know those are memorable games any year, but it sounds like that year particularly were meaningful. But you also made it into the playoffs that year against McGill-Tulane. And do you have any memories, any on-field or off-field memories from any of those particular games?
I remember the week before had beaten Dothan in a huge, obviously emotional game and great win, great victory, and then trying to shift gears to get us ready to play in the playoffs, hosting a game, and a game that we felt like we should win. And we didn't play particularly well, but the guys played hard. But we had 2 or 3 critical turnovers, and I don't remember even the score. You probably have looked at that. I hadn't looked at that in a while, but I think it was a 1-score loss, if I remember right. And but the team had a great season, and those guys really kind of put a stamp on the program at Northview, and winning the region. And a couple of other games we lost that year. Lanier was a tough game that was a tough loss that had the young man that played quarterback and played at the Vikings. I can't remember his name now.
His name off the top of my head.
He got killed in a car wreck about a year or two ago, but he was a great athlete. But anyway, we could have easily won that game, and there were 2 or 3 others, Eufaula and some other games that we had lost that we missed an extra point. And Vestavia was the defending state champion, came down here to Repuse, and we had them on the ropes, had led much of the game and against them, and then they scored late to tie it, and then we got the ball and drove it. I think maybe it was in regulation and missed a field goal, and then we missed an extra point or maybe we didn't kick the extra point. We tried to go for 2. That's what it was. We missed a chip shot field goal, had a freshman kid kicking. And it wasn't his fault, but I made the decision that we would go for 2 there in the overtime, and we didn't make it, and they beat us by a point. But it was a great year, great team. A lot of big victories in that season, especially.
I know that's a memorable season, and I know you had a couple of more seasons. A few weeks back, I had Brian Jackson on, the kicker, and he shared some great on-field stories about one where he misread Coach. I think it was Coach Griffin, or maybe you had called for the kick it deep, but he misread it as to re-kick an onside kick, and it ended up being successful. But
Yep.
the signal was I think this, or I can't remember what the signal was, but he misread it, but it played out just fine. But Brian was funny. He had some great things to say about his time at Northview. Coach, one of the things I wanted to ask you that I think you were known for, being tough but being fair, being intense but having a lot of expectations, because particularly your players, when they bought into your system, they were fully into it. And I guess what I want to ask you from a coaching standpoint, what were some of your philosophies about how to get your ball players to buy into your system, to trust you, to have that loyalty to what the theme that you were trying to put across to your teams?
Good question. Well, I think certainly hard work. That most of the quote unquote intangibles that occur on a team are tangibilized in the off season and by how people work together. And those particular guys there, we didn't have a whole bunch of guys on that team that year. I think we were at about 50 kids in the program on the varsity, and I'm thinking the '99 season, but they were bought in and worked hard in the off-season program. We brought in a bigger, faster, stronger guy. I'd done that at Dothan High, and one of the reasons I did that was it was just me. They heard my voice every single day, and I'm also the head coach. And to me, it was just it was an important thing for them to understand that it's not just me and my voice and what I think, but there is something behind the motivating aspect of having somebody else sharing what they're trying to do and to get them motivated into what they need to do in training. And so we did that. That made a difference. I think that was a turning point in the off season, and I think it probably ended up helping us in the season. But then, that everybody works and everybody plays together as a team. One person is not more important than another. That particular year, that team did not have a person that obviously was a quarterback. We knew that. And so I felt like it wasn't an obvious, we can spread it out and start throwing the ball. There just wasn't a person. There had been pretty much a person that was in that position. So Clint Wade, as a sophomore, great athlete. Clint certainly is. But he started as a sophomore. And then in the Central Phoenix City game, another game that was a tough loss we had them, we was kind of back and forth kind of game, if I remember it right. And they ended up winning late in that game, but Clint broke his arm. And so we had to move Johnny Falk to the quarterback position, even though he would be the first one to tell you probably couldn't throw the ball the length of a basketball gym. But the irony in that, Bernard, is that we beat Dothan on a touchdown pass from Johnny that he threw, and that was the margin of victory in the Dothan Northview game that year.
Well, I'm hoping to get Johnny on here to tell that story. I've heard that before. But Coach, we got a bunch of other folks who are rolling in, so I want to share some names with you. Jason Mullins says to tell you hello. We've got, oh gosh, they've rolled through so quickly. I'm sorry. Let me see if they'll pop up. They'll pop up in just a second. Let's see some more comments for you. Andy says the 99 seniors. He said that's the hardest working group of men he's ever been around, no doubt. And thanks to you. Coach Griffin is a legend. I absolutely agree with that, Andy. And I think anybody affiliated with Northview program, Northview High School, would believe that. And I don't know if you guys know this. You may know this, Coach, that Coach Griffin was one of the students that helped to integrate the Dothan City school system in I think either 68 or 69 or 70 at Dothan High School. And I truly, that's one of so many stories I want to talk about with Coach, and hopefully one day he'll join me. But Coach Latta, you had a couple of more seasons at Northview that weren't as productive as the 99 season. At what point did you realize it was time to make a move and you were going to be moving on eventually to Providence and do some wonderful things over there?
Yeah. So I think the 2000 season, I think we won 3 games, but it was enough to put us in the playoffs. I remember the Auburn, Smith Station. I remember going to Smith Station and knowing that we had to beat them to make the playoffs. And that was the first year of region play. So we had Central Phoenix City. If I remember right, that was the first, I think it was.
It was, and that has to, historically, if there was a tougher region, I want you to show me which one it was.
So Opelika in their heyday with Spence McCracken, Central Phoenix City, always tough, still is, 20 plus years later. Enterprise, I mean, you're grinding it out in what would be an elite 7A schedule with 6A numbers and 2 schools in town. So, but I was proud of that team because that team made it happen. We won just a handful of games, but it was enough to make the playoffs and represented in the playoffs. So we go to we draw Daphne in the first round of the playoffs. Steve Savarese was still coaching then, and they were defending state champions also. And I want to say again, I'm not looking at the score. You probably looked at it somewhere. It was 24 to 13 or 24 to 12 or something like that was the game.
It looked like a hard fought game just on paper, but not having seen any of the film, it looked like a tough game.
Yeah. So Gant played a good bit of that game as quarterback as a sophomore. And we had, again, it was a tough year but the guys that worked hard, we were close, some close losses, but you just didn't feel, and the team didn't feel like losers, even though we didn't win a whole lot of games. And I was proud of the way they competed. But you can see the talent level was not going to be what it had been. I don't think anybody ever saw the 2001 season where we didn't win a game. But those guys worked hard. We trained them hard. We went to camp in August. Really those 3 years we took a week and we would loaded up the truck, took our weight equipment with us and all of our football equipment and went off and spent 4 or 5 days just where we could be together, build some team and focus on what we needed to do to play together as a team.
I was going to ask you about that, Coach. Where did y'all go? Where'd you go for that week?
So we went to the Coffee Baptist Vineyard, which is up in Ayrton. We went, I guess the last 2 years I was at Northview, we did that. And it was a really positive experience. And I thought, just trying to get the guys together. One of the funny stories is Coach David Collins trying to help the guys who couldn't swim, because obviously we were concerned about that, because one of the things we did was a canoe race where we tried to move this big physio ball in your canoe. You had to get it over to the island and back. And we were really worried about somebody falling out of that canoe. And if they couldn't swim, that we were going to have problems. And so he got them in the swimming pool and we tried to help teach them how to swim. And we just had some real laughs at, because there were 2 or 3 people who had never, had swim lessons. And
that's some real team bonding right there. Our classes never did that, but not to age myself, but I bet you went through something similar when you were at Dothan. Is back in the day during the early camp, you practice basically 3 times a day. You'd have a couple of hours in between to rest and rehydrate and eat a little bit, but you basically stayed at the school. We did all day long. I remember sleeping a little bit in my car, just trying to catch a few Z's.
Yeah.
But leaving the house early and coming back late at night, but I never got to do a camp like that. So I bet that was a unique experience for those players and those teams.
It was. Yeah, I wish the teams, I wish especially those last 2 seasons could have been better. But you learn a lot, and even in not being successful on the field, and you learn a lot about yourself. And I don't think there's any place for blaming anybody or anything. We were just outmanned in much of the games that we played, and there's lessons to be learned in that. So I'm proud of the coaching staff for staying together, and it's easy to be divisive when things aren't going well and start, how it is. Everybody's been in the locker room when the offense blames the defense, or somebody is kind of made the scapegoat that didn't do something well or fumbled the ball or did whatever. And so, I know that God uses those times in our lives as a team and as individuals to learn how to give and take, and then even how to bow up, how to bounce back, how to come back and play. And, I was, even that year, I was proud of the guys and the effort in the Dothan game, even though we were outmanned certainly in that from an athlete standpoint. But, it was a memorable, and most of the 5 years were wonderful that I spent at Northview, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Coach, I was going to say, there's so many life lessons. Whether you actually win on the scoreboard or not doesn't indicate what type of person you are. That's for sure. And you could be a state champion, or you could have a season where you win no games whatsoever, and you're going to learn things. And I'm sure you're still in Dothan. It's been 20 odd years since then. And I suspect from time to time, you see players from those 5 seasons.
Oh, yeah.
And I bet there's hugs, handshakes, and laughs and all kind of good stuff that come out of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I wouldn't trade the relationships for anything. And, even in the hardship of the difficult days that happened, and, that every team has them, some just has them more than others, but I'm proud of them, proud to be their coach. And I still see some guys on that were on the team that we didn't have a victory that year, but still love them. They're still your guys. And, I was proud of them for staying together. Like I said before, and the coaching staff did. And, we were ready to truck on and give it a go again. And that just didn't work out, but that's okay. God has a plan for our lives. And sometimes it's not meant to be in places. And so it's okay. But it's not about me, and it's not about that. It's about, learning how to fight, learning how to work together, learn how to set a goal and work at it, and then adjust if you don't get it. I mean, that's in anything that you do is true. So,
well, Coach, I couldn't agree with you more, but I know you ended up pivoting back to Providence, where you've been for many years. And I got to ask you a couple things about Providence School. You've been there, and I hate to say that you're now part of the old guard. Don't take it that way. But from some of the guys who you coached back in the day, are you now starting to coach or see their children come through Providence and maybe play other sports or maybe play football?
oh, absolutely. They're out of both Dothan High and Northview. And so, as a matter of fact, I was walking out just 2 hours ago when I was leaving to come home, and Jason Smoke, who played for us at Dothan High in the late 80s, his 2 girls go to Providence, or one's in preschool, but the other one is a student at our school. So, oh yeah, all the time, all kind of connections. Clint Wade's daughters go to Providence. So, and then there's all kind of connections. I see people all the time. I go, I did not know. I mean, one of the boys that I had, I'm still the golf coach. And so one of the boys that played on the golf team 2 years ago, I just found out the other day, I saw Mike Dunning in the line. Of course, Mark Dunning and I grew up playing ball together in Dothan. And Mike is Mark's older brother. And then, but the boy that I was talking about was his grandson. I didn't even know, because he's not a Dunning, he's somebody else. I didn't even put that together. And they'd been there, several years. I never even made that connection. So
I bet that's pretty cool for you, though.
Yeah.
That's a pretty cool connection, just for all those years being part of the Dothan systems.
And I think it's important to say this. So I learned so much through the experiences at both Dothan and Northview. And I did coach a year at Daleville too, between the two.
Mhm.
And so I learned a lot. And, I know that the Lord used those experiences with us. So when we started the programs at Providence, and even especially the football program, so a lot of that helped us with laying the foundation to try to see that. And that was a neat thing to get to do. So it was to be able to do that. But again, the guys and how hard they worked, and Andre Ward, I didn't mention Andre a while ago, and the successes that all the people that you've coached, the kind of people they became and have become, is a big part of. You feel like you had an investment in that too, and so that's probably for me been Chase Smith, who now is an orthopedic doctor and was a senior on that '99 team that was we talked about a while ago. And just, now he's on the sideline in some of our games, and I get to chat with him, and he'd say, "Coach, you remember?" Oh yeah, I do remember.
Oh, that's so cool, because it's reliving some memories that, again, like you and I talked before we came online, some of the memories that you share and these chuckles, they're probably absolutely factually correct. But then there's other memories that they get a little stretched here or there, but it still makes for a good story. And we're getting real close toward the end, Coach Latta, and I appreciate your time and taking us through your story. It's been fascinating for me. But I want to ask you, grew up, played sports in the 70s, graduated, then you got into coaching all through the 80s, 90s, and even up through now. There's been a huge change in society. There's been a big change in children as they progress. And what I want to ask you is, have you observed the difference in the current athlete in high school and how we were back in the day? What I mean by that is, coaching philosophies have to change. We live in a society of instant gratification because everybody has a cell phone right here, and we all want to be on social media and those kind of things. How does the current coach instill those same principles that you were working on in the 70s and 80s and 90s how do you get to that modern athlete and get him to buy in, or her to buy in to your philosophies as a coach?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think people are that much different. I think obviously culture is different. Parents are different. A lot more hedonistic, and what have you done for me today? What is this? How's this going to help me? I think it's easy for parents to say now, well, if you're not on the varsity, if you're not getting a start, I don't blame you. I wouldn't waste my time, that kind of thing. But I think to me that makes the coach, the old school mentality of team and putting team first and sacrifice and playing for your teammate, not just for yourself, even more important. And so I think it has probably a greater impact now than it did even when we were growing up, because most of our parents were that way. That's just the way culture was. You didn't think a whole lot about that. But now that's different. And I heard a guy say one time, high school football is one of the few sports that somebody hasn't tried to make easy. And that's true. And it's still hot. It's still physical. And most of the kids, especially if they're in, middle income and higher families, they're not used to having to work like that. And so, for them, that is a territory they've never been in. So they have to learn how to work and how to sacrifice physically for somebody else. I mean, when you're blocking for somebody, you are physically putting yourself in danger for the benefit of the team to try to move the ball down the field. I mean, we don't really think about it in those terms all the time, but certainly that's football. And so I enjoyed, taking having the opportunity with those younger guys. And I think probably I've always loved coaching offensive linemen, but especially the younger ones, to be able to do that. And then get in the weight room, and that's where we did it too. And no pain, no gain, and you got to push it, and push the envelope, and find out who really wants it. And kid gets a little muscle, it gets a little stronger, and he can deadlift 2 plates on each side. And as an 8th or 9th grader, he's thinking, I might could play this game. And you see the light come on. And, oh yes, that's what this is all about. And then putting together a team, and and then having a huge win, and there's so many big wins at Northview. That first year, that comeback, reverse Joe, Joe Chambers, catching the ball from Tarsus Thomas. We ran a reverse pass, and Tarsus Thomas slings that thing to Joe Chambers, and he catches it. Basket catch, kind of, he was wide open. The ball's a little underthrown, but that got us down there inside the 10, and then we scored. Gabe's senior year, what a huge win that was for our team. And I remember it rained the day before that, and I know I'm about to run over time, but it rained the day before the game on that Thursday, so we couldn't practice. So we're sitting in the locker room at Northview, and we had a prayer meeting. I mean, it was like, that's when that team came together. So it was 12 or 13 weeks into the season. The day before we played Dothan High, they put all the hard feelings aside. There was just something that had the restlessness that was amongst that team. I don't know all the dynamics of it, except that they put it aside and went out there and made their minds up. They were going to beat Dothan, which Dothan was undefeated the last 2 seasons, I think, when we played them then.
Coach, was that the same game where Gabe threw the 90-yard touchdown pass?
Mm-hmm.
I had Gabe on. He was one of my very first guests.
Okay.
And I wanted to congratulate him because he beat my record. I had the 87-yarder, and
Okay.
Gabe was the longest in the program's history. Gabe was an awesome discussion we had a while back. But Coach Latta, I could talk to you. Your enthusiasm is still so infectious. Your love of the game and for teaching and coaching young people is always been there, and that's what I've always appreciated about you. And I know so many in the community feel that way. So thank you for spending some time with me tonight.
No, thank you. I appreciate you doing this for Northview and for the program, and so that people don't forget, what has been invested in, the lives have been touched. But I appreciate you doing it for all the guys.
My pleasure. I can assure you this is my pleasure because I'm getting to meet Cougars from all 41 years, and it's just great putting together an oral history. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. There were so many names, Coach, I couldn't list them all.
Yeah.
So a lot of love for you tonight. So thank you. And before I sign off, guys, on a little more somber note, I put in the message, in the group chat yesterday that the funeral services for Bruce Johnson, I believe is tomorrow or Friday, are also, it's listed in there for any of you who want to live stream in there. I know that Bruce will be sadly missed. He was such a great Cougar and a great friend to so many, class of 84. But again, thank you guys. Next week, I've got a defensive back also from that same era, Robert Hollywood Henderson. Butch is going to join me next Wednesday on Conversations with Cougars. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you.